Prize in the category of
Good afternoon. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on an oil painting distressed hue. Alright, I went back in, erased some of these, and relined their noses because it kind of turned into a knot where I tried to bend these faces around this sort of flat, and because I wanted them all to emanate straight in a straight line out from the edge of his body, and then trying to twist them right here, it just totally clusterfucked this area. So I kind of redid that a little bit, and now I think they're set well enough for me to shadow and light them all without it looking too bungled. But for the moment, I'm just going to hit black, straight black, and start doing all of the eyes. I'm presently transferring a huge quantity of data from one external hard drive into another. My old multi-terabyte drive filled up, so I had to upgrade, and the transfer process is probably going to take a couple of days. But it's slowly but surely, so what I'm probably going to do is, in between the break of the next file transfer, is process this video and post it, so I'm not taxing my drives too much while I'm trying to transfer so much data, because if I locked up my computer right now, I'd probably just cry. So anyway, there we go. So here we go, black eyes.
As they basically assaulted both my parents. Can you talk about the day that your dad was arrested?
On the day when my dad was arrested, I was actually working on my diploma thesis for my master's degree, and we actually talked, and he told me that he's gonna come and read that and let me know what he thinks about it. And then he went together with my mom to do a shopping. My dad came to see my grandma, who is a disabled person, so they were doing shopping for her. And then on the way, while driving, the 6 police cars, actually they were civil cars, so they didn't have any police emblem on them, physically they crashed their car, and then 20 men in black came and physically assaulted my parents. My mom was extremely terrified. She actually thought that this is some kind of a trafficking or mafia, organ mafia or sex mafia. So she was actually screaming, saying that I'm too old for that, my husband's organs are not working, because they didn't have any police symbol, and they didn't even introduce themselves. So they basically attacked on my family, my parents. As a result, my mom lost 30% of her nerve function on her right side of brain, so she has been having difficulties to balance herself. And my dad was kept 9 months under the isolation center without no access to drinkable water, proper food, or medication, and then transferred to the hospitals.
And talk more about what happened to your mother.
So, while my mom was detained, she was actually kept there to pressure my dad. And the reason that they were trying to do is they were threatening my dad that they're going to rape her and they're going to physically assault her. So they were kept in different cars, but then later on in different rooms in organized crime department since their detention, so they couldn't even meet. My mom has to stay in Azerbaijan for 2 months, and she was being followed all the time. We couldn't get her out because she had a travel ban, but me and my brothers, we have been doing this advocacy around the world to rescue our parents, and as a result of the European Parliament resolution on September 2023, we managed to move my mom to Sweden together with me. So she's staying with me right now, and we have to hospitalize her a couple of times in Lund Hospital. However, it took us 2 months to get her out, and she was, in a sense, of a priority to rescue, because we were extremely worried about her, as she has never done anything political, and the reason that they did this, the way that they physically assaulted my parents and brutally attacked them, is because they wanted to show everybody and create also a chilling effect. They wanted to show that, see, if the Aliyev regime can detain a LSE professor and actually can physically assault his wife, then he can do it to anybody, because never in our history anybody's wife has been detained or has been physically assaulted in this way. So it's the first step for us, for our society as well.
We're, I guess you could say, in a kind of silo here at the UN Climate Summit, Jala. And there's very little awareness here of what's going on outside. If you can talk about what has happened over the last year in the lead up to this COP summit, and your father, an anti-corruption economist, is not unrelated to this summit because he particularly is calling for transparency around oil and gas transactions. And if you can talk about what those oil and gas transactions mean for the president, Aliyev, and the people in his government.
Now, we basically have more than 300 political prisoners. When my dad was detained, before his detention, we had 98 political prisoners, and after him, in less than 6 months, they detained more than 200 people. So what we call it is a start of an unprecedented crackdown, and what we understand that is quite related to COP29. In previous events that Azerbaijan hosted, like Eurovision or some kind of like European Games, we had a lot of activism has been done by civil society. People will do a lot of activism, people will try to inform everybody what's going on in Azerbaijan. So basically, in a sense, the regime, learning from this, decided to clean up all the streets from activists from Azerbaijan or from all the civil society. Even there was two separate persons who protested in blue and green zone. They were also physically assaulted and was kicked out from both places, and they were both Azerbaijanis who has been protesting for animal rights, but also the labor rights of the people who has been working for the COP29 venue, and they have not been paid enough. As for the oil and gas, what my dad's research shows is that the 1.3% of the whole energy balance of Azerbaijan comes from renewable energy. So 70% and 28% respectively comes from oil and gas energy. So Azerbaijan is not even actually investing on renewable energy. At the same time, the more than 50% of Azerbaijani budget revenues actually comes from oil and gas. So it's very important because after the invasion of Ukraine, right now Europe is trying to rely on Azerbaijan and buying oil and gas from Azerbaijan. But also my dad's research shows that the oil and gas that Azerbaijan pumps to Europe is not really coming from Azerbaijan because the Azerbaijani oil and gas basically extraction is getting more and more difficult, and we don't really have enough to supply it to Europe. What Azerbaijan right now is doing, also buying it from Russia. So considering that our economy is completely relying on oil and gas sales, and the COP29 is a great place to have a lot of oil and gas lobbyists, it's actually a great chance for Azerbaijani government to have more oil and gas contracts, whether this comes from Russia or not, and then to enrich the regime itself.
Zhala Baramova, you are a human rights lawyer. You have a good deal of experience understanding what's going on here. If you could explain who the Azerbaijani president is, Ilham Aliyev. He's been in power for 20 years following his father. His regime routinely targeting climate activists, human rights activists, and journalists, jailing them.
I can actually explain it from my own experience in Azerbaijan when I was living there. I was tortured twice in Baku and also in Lankaran, in a different city as well. So I'm a human rights lawyer, but I was also working as an activist. I have been observing the elections, writing the cases to European Court of Human Rights, and what happened is that as a result of all these tortures, I cannot sleep without a neck pillow as they injured my neck discs. They also crushed my ribs and my kneecaps, so which means that I am unable to wear a normal bra and all those things because I still have injuries that I have in my body, and I'm also diagnosed with PTSD. So this is one example from me, but that's not it. Azerbaijan government is not only staying there and only targeting us physically, detaining us in detention center. No, they're also trying to target us psychologically. So for example, they spread our personal photos. My personal photos have been spread on the internet, and those photos was from my first Halloween in Sweden. So they're spreading this kind of photos as trying to picture us in a bad light, saying that we are very pro-Western, we're very pro-European, so we are celebrating Halloween and all these things. I also have pictures and also my dad's with LGBT flags, which they also spread on internet. Azerbaijani government also sex tape the activists. They put hidden cameras to their rooms, to their bathrooms. They even sometimes send spies to have a relationship with especially women activists and sex tape it and put it on internet. So it sounds like a movie, but it's in a real life situation in Azerbaijan. At the same time, while talking about the regime, I think it's quite clear when looking at the Azerbaijan regime, it's quite clear to see that before Ilham Aliyev, it was his father, who was also president of Azerbaijan during Soviet Union and a KGB general. And Ilham Aliyev, as it seems, getting his son to get ready to succeed himself. And his wife is a vice president of Azerbaijan. So it's more like a monarchy, it's a family affair in a sense, and they own everything. Like they own all the insurance companies, they own all the banks, properties, and everything it's not a state owned, it's a family oligarch owned in Azerbaijan.
Ijala Baramova, we want to thank you for being with us, Azerbaijani human rights lawyer, LGBTQ activist, and daughter of the political prisoner Gulbad Ibadoglu, a prominent anti-corruption economist and well-known professor, imprisoned and now under house arrest. Ijala has been advocating for his release as well as the release of other political prisoners in Azerbaijan. Coming up next, we look at the growing debate over nuclear power as Google, Amazon, Microsoft invest in nuclear plants to power their artificial intelligence projects. Stay with us. Azerbaijani guitarist Ramin Mehmedli. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting here at the UN Climate Summit in Baku, Azerbaijan. We turn now to look at the controversial push here at the UN Climate Summit to expand nuclear power production across the globe. Supporters of nuclear energy view it as a carbon-free energy source that's needed to combat the climate crisis. But critics warn nuclear power is too expensive and risky. Last year at the UN Climate Summit in Dubai, more than 24 countries, including the United States, pledged to triple nuclear energy capacity. In a statement, the country said expanding nuclear energy is needed for, quote, achieving global net zero greenhouse gas emissions carbon neutrality by or around mid-century and in keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius limit on temperature rise. 6 more countries joined the pledge last week. The Biden administration recently unveiled a plan to create an additional 200 gigawatts of nuclear energy capacity by mid-century. The incoming Trump administration is expected to continue the push to expand nuclear energy. Trump's pick for energy secretary, the fracking magnate, CEO Chris Wright, sits on the board of the nuclear power startup Oklo. Meanwhile, private tech companies are also investing in nuclear energy. Google's announced plans to build 7 small nuclear reactors in the U.S. to help power the company's data centers and artificial intelligence systems. Microsoft has said it would fund the reopening of the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, the site of the worst nuclear disaster in U.S. history. And Amazon's cloud computing subsidiary has signed a deal with Dominion Energy to develop small nuclear reactors. We're joined right now by 3 guests. Alex DeVries, we're going to go to first. He's joining us from Amsterdam, a PhD candidate who studies the sustainability of emerging technologies at the VU Amsterdam University. He's the founder of Digiconomist, a research company dedicated to exposing the unintended consequences of artificial intelligence and cryptocurrencies. Alex, we're going to begin with you. Can you explain why there is such an enormous need for energy when it comes to artificial intelligence, AI data centers?
Well, the thing with generative AI and, huge applications like ChatGPT is that they're really using massive models in the background. And one typical dynamic is that the bigger you make those models, the better they perform, which is what everyone wants. But the downside of that is that bigger models also means more computational resources are required and thus energy in the end. When we had multi-million parameter models just a few years ago, now you're talking about models with billions or even trillions of parameters, and they just keep growing because everyone wants to offer the best user experience, but that costs a lot of resources.
So talk about, I don't know even how much people understand. In 2016, you found one Bitcoin transaction consumes as much energy as the average American household does in a day. Why does AI, why do cryptocurrencies, we talked about Amazon, we talked about Google, also Elon Musk with cryptocurrencies, with Bitcoin, why do they require so much electricity?
Yeah, they actually both contain economic incentives to keep spending more on energy. In the case of cryptocurrency mining, there is a reward available for those who participate in the mining process, and ultimately everyone is incentivized to just, keep putting in more computational power as long as it's profitable to do so. So the more money is available as a reward, which has been growing over the past few years as the Bitcoin price kept going up in value, the more people put in energy-hungry equipment to participate in that process. And with AI, it has very similar incentives in the sense that everyone wants to have the biggest, best and most energy-hungry model, simply because the biggest models offer the best user experience, and that in turn will give you the biggest market share and thus the highest revenues. So both of these technologies contain different but still economic incentives to keep using more resources to make these applications run.
So why is Bitcoin responsible for more than 95% of the carbon footprint of all cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, that's because Bitcoin uses the very specific mining process where in order to create a new block for the underlying blockchain, a new block of transactions, everyone in the Bitcoin network has to participate in what I like to describe as a massive game of guess the number, whereas the whole network is making an insane amount of calculations every second of the day, 600 quintillion tenths. That's like 600 with 18 zeros every second of the day, non-stop. One participant guesses correctly every 10 minutes and then gets to create the next block for the blockchain, and they get a reward for that. These miners are earning up to or more than $10 billion a year from this process, but of course they're also spending a huge amount of money on the energy to participate in this process. And nowadays, actually more than entire countries like Sweden and Argentina just for mining Bitcoin. But other cryptocurrencies, they use other types of algorithms, so those algorithms are not dependent on computational effort. This is why Bitcoin is kind of the only big cryptocurrency left standing today, which still uses the extremely energy-intensive mining.
So I wanted to ask you about the organizations and the people who are pushing for nuclear energy to fulfill the demands of AI and cryptocurrency. If you could talk about some of these companies. Well, we know Elon Musk, for example, is pro-nuclear.
Yes, of course. Well, there's actually two avenues here. First of all, what we see is that a lot of these tech companies are looking at existing nuclear energy sources as a way to power their AI operations today. One obvious advantage of nuclear power is that it's zero carbon energy. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to get this power from nuclear reactors that have previously been shut down. They're trying to revive these nuclear reactors. And this actually carries a very interesting safety dimension, because if you look at what goes on is that these nuclear reactors, they get shut down at a certain point in time. They start to decay because the moment they shut down, they no longer have to meet safety regulations. And now these big tech companies show up and try to revive these facilities, which are already outdated and haven't been safe for quite some time, just to power their current AI operations because they want to have zero carbon energy. It carries a lot of safety risks. And then the other avenue is going forward. We also see a lot of talk about expanding the existing nuclear power supply to fuel future AI energy demand. But then the thing is, there's actually quite a bit of a mismatch between the needs of the tech companies today and, the ability to deliver that power to them. Because if you are building out new nuclear infrastructure, those are long-term projects that can take up to a decade to complete, while we're in the middle of an AI hype today, and no one is guaranteeing that there will still be this much demand for AI 10 years from now when your nuclear reactor is finished.
We're speaking to you in Amsterdam. The Netherlands had decided to phase out nuclear power, but then reversed its decision. There are 2 new nuclear plants being built there where you are.
You can see that nuclear power is indeed experiencing a bit of a revival. I guess everyone is realizing that this type of power is zero carbon, and that's what we need if we're going to go green. Obviously, it's not as safe as wind or solar power, but then again, nuclear reactors nowadays, with the latest technological standards, are still fairly safe, but it's just that constructing them is relatively expensive compared to expanding the wind and solar power supply. So whether this is the best investment still remains a question.
All right. Well, Trump sets up the plot for Fallout 6, where you won't need a VR helmet. I'm going to take a break and splice another set onto this one and do that as one post in a little while, in between my file transfers happening here. Okay. Thanks for watching. It's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting, distressed hue. Another segment starting, after it's edited immediately. Thanks, sir. Alright, here we go. Take 2.
The statistical evidence for telepathy is overwhelming. Turing was convinced that it existed, and he thought that the way to run a test, to test between a person and a machine, would be to do a telepathy test. Here's the account of it. Given that you had a human being gifted with ESP in one room and a computer in another, the player in his imitation game could ask the 2 candidates to guess a given sequence of cards. Since the computer, using a random number generator, would be able to guess only at chance levels, it would soon become clear which of the 2 was the human being and which was the computer. Fascinating that he should have taken what's really an implicit idea in telepathy, that the mind is extended beyond the brain, as the thing that would distinguish between computers and human beings. Well, what I'm going to talk about now is the idea of the extended mind, the mind beyond the brain, in ordinary visual perception. I'm not talking now about obscure, marginal phenomena. I'm talking about mainstream phenomena happening all the time, like you seeing me standing here. The normal way of understanding visual perception is known to everyone in this room. It's, of course, that light reflected from me goes through the electromagnetic field, enters your eye, through the lens, inverted images on your retinas, changes in the cone cells, electrical impulses up the optic nerve, changes in the brain, electrical and chemical changes in various regions of the brain. So far, so good. This has been studied in great detail. But then comes something very mysterious. You form a conscious image of me. There's nothing in any of the standard computing way that people think about vision to explain why you should have a conscious image at all. It should just be a matter of wires processing information. But in fact, you do have a conscious image of me. And the second mystery, rarely discussed, but very problematic when you think about it, is that your conscious image of me is supposed to be a kind of virtual reality show going on inside your head. It's all supposed to be inside your head, because the conventional assumption is that the mind is the brain. It's all in the head. Now, I imagine that none of you are experiencing your image of me as being located inside your head. I'm guessing that you're experiencing it as being located right here where I'm standing. And the theory I want to put forward is so simple that it's really hard to understand. And that is that your image of me is located right here. It's an image in your mind, it's interpreted by your mind, but it's not inside your head. It's outside your head where it seems to be. So I'm suggesting vision involves a two-way process, an inward movement of light and an outward projection of the entire visual world. Everything you see is projected out. In a sense, your mind is reaching out to touch what you're looking at. The virtual reality show isn't in your head. It's projected out and coinciding with the actual world. Sometimes it doesn't, then you have an illusion or a hallucination. But usually it does, and if it didn't, we'd bump into things all the time and wouldn't survive very long. When you think about the conventional view that it's all inside the head, it leads to a very absurd paradox, which very few people actually think through. If the whole room that you're experiencing, all this perceptual world is inside your head, then if you look outside when you're outdoors and you look up at the stars, then they're inside your head too. So your skull must be beyond the sky. This is the subject of a recent paper in Brain and Behavioural Science, where someone's pointed out this is the implication of the normal view. The skull is beyond the sky. I'm saying the skull's right where it seems to be, and the perceptual world's out there. This is not a new theory. It's the theory advocated by Plato. It was believed by most of the ancient Greeks and Romans, most of the medieval philosophers. It's believed by traditional people all over the world, taught by Hindu and Tibetan sages. The only people who don't believe it are people with a scientific education in the West for the last 350 years. And as a matter of fact, even young children believe that vision's a two-way process. Jean Piaget, in his studies on children's intellectual development, showed that until the age of 10 or 11, the average child believed that vision involved projection out as well as a movement of light in. However, he said by the age of 10 or 11, the average child learns the correct view, which is that thoughts and images are invisible things located inside the head. Now, most of us assimilated that idea when we were far too young to think about it, or certainly to challenge it. And so it becomes an implicit assumption of our whole culture, even though no one's ever seen an image inside anyone's head. There's virtually no evidence for it whatsoever, and yet it's almost universally believed. It's a very deep-seated habit of thought. Even in the modern world, a number of philosophers have challenged the view and put forward a view similar to the one I'm advancing, including Henri Bergson, the French philosopher, Alfred North Whitehead, the British philosopher, and several philosophers working today. There's a British one called Max Velmans, who is advancing this view in a very sophisticated and convincing way. But I'm not talking about philosophy here, I'm talking about a scientific hypothesis. If our minds reach out to touch what we're looking at, then it means that we may even be able to affect things by looking at them. And this leads to quite a number of predictions. Imagine that you're looking at another person from behind. They don't know you're there. They can't see you, hear you, smell you, touch you. And you just stare at their back. Could they detect your gaze? Well, the answer is, this is a common experience. Most people have had the experience of turning around to find someone staring at them, or staring at someone and making them turn around. Surveys show that over 90% of the population have had these experiences. So I'm guessing that most people in this room would know what I'm talking about from personal experience. There is a slight sex difference. More women than men have experienced being looked at. More men than women have experienced looking at others and making them turn around. Nevertheless, the vast majority of both are familiar with this experience. So what's really going on? Well, it turns out it's very easy to test this. An extraordinarily simple experiment can be done to test this phenomenon. In its simplest form, this experiment involves people working in pairs. One of them wears a blindfold. I use these airline blindfolds because they're free, at least if you travel on airlines. And so the subject sits there wearing the blindfold. The person who does the staring sits behind them, at several meters behind them. And then in a random series of trials, they either stare at the back of the person's neck or look away and think of something else. So you're the subject, you're sitting here, you hear a click or a beep that tells you the trial's begun. Click. And then I have to guess if I'm being stared at or not. Well, right now, I just then guessed I was being stared at, and I was right. But it's a very simple test. You're right or you're wrong. By chance, you'd be right 50% of the time. In fact, people are right very consistently more than 50%. This gives extraordinarily repeatable results. This experiment is so simple, a child can do it, and in fact thousands of children already have done it. It's been done widely in schools in Britain, Germany and the United States. And thousands of adults have done it too. The pattern of results is extremely clear and predictable. By the way, you may be surprised in me using overheads here in a centre such as this. The reason I do is I had so many problems with PowerPoint, because I use a Mac, that the last seminar I gave was at the Microsoft Research Center in Seattle. And I said to them, will your PowerPoint system work? And they said, sure. And I said, well, let's try it. And they said, no need to try it. So I put my disk in, and of course it didn't work, because it's a Mac system. I said, have you got a Mac? They said, no. So a guy had to go for half an hour around the campus till they found a Mac. They emailed the program over, and then he said, no, it's fine. And I said, well, you know, I just want to check it. So I checked, there were no pictures on the things. It needed another program they hadn't got. He said, well, we can download it from the internet. And I said, the seminar begins in 2 minutes. So there was only one answer. They had to trundle on the overhead projector. And I said, well, I always carry these. I had so much trouble with PowerPoint. So anyway, here I'm using the overheads. This shows the results of trials which involved about 700 people. This is a sample of the kind of data we get. In the looking trials, typically we get about 60-40, 60% right, 40% wrong. In the not looking trials, virtually equal, the chance level, and the average is about 55-45%. This is a very typical pattern of results that occurs over and over and over again. When I first got these data, one of my sceptical colleagues, Professor Nicholas Humphrey, said that he was sure there was a statistical artifact here, and he suggested a better way of analysing them, where each person who takes part is given an equal weighting. If people are more right than wrong, they're scored plus. If they're more wrong than right, they're scored minus. And if they're equal, then of course it's equal. And he go away when I used what he said was a fairer method. Well, I did his method, and this is the same result according to the Humphrey system, which showed huge effect. The statistical significance of this effect is about 10 to the minus 25. I mean, it's astronomically significant. This one's 10 to the minus 15. Why do we get this effect? My interpretation is that in the looking trials, if people have a sense of being stared at, it would work when they're being stared at in the looking trials, which is where we see it. In the not looking trials, people are being asked to do something completely artificial, namely guess when they're not being looked at. Now, most of us don't have a sense of not being looked at. People who are exceptionally vain may have it, but most people don't know when they're not being looked at. So at that stage, they're just guessing, and we get a chance effect. Same here, you see, it's not significantly different from chance, and this is 10 to the minus 25. This is a massive effect. Well, of course, this work has been challenged by skeptics, and one group of skeptics in England tried reproducing my experiment following my own methods. And here we see the results. A is the results of my experiments. B is the results of the skeptics' experiments. And as you see, it's exactly the same. They did this through one-way mirrors with tremendous insulation for sound. It was more rigorous than the way I usually do mine. I've done mine through mirrors and through all sorts of things that eliminate sounds and smells and all the rest of it. Theirs was one of the most rigorous so far, exactly the same pattern. They tried to explain it away as some kind of artifact of the randomization system, but in fact, you get the same pattern whatever randomization system you use. We now have an online version of this experiment where you can log on to my website and do the experiment there and then. It tells you, gives you all the instructions, you key in the results, and so on. And so this experiment is readily accessible. You can also download the instructions. If any of you are teachers, you can do the experiment with a class of children as long as they're over about 8 or 9 years old. You get everything you need. You can download the randomized sheets to give to the children and so on. And the whole experiment can be done in a normal class within half an hour, and it costs nothing. This has now been done quite widely in schools in England, and teachers find that it interests children in science. People who had no interest in science before get interested, because here's a real experiment dealing with a real question. There's no standard answer in the textbooks. And there's always in every school people who are skeptical, those who believe in it. And here's a way where science can actually look at an unknown phenomenon. The largest test of this phenomenon in the world has been done right here in Amsterdam at the new Metropolis Centre, where there's some of you may have seen it. There's a most ingeniously designed computerized version of this experiment, where the instructions are given by the computer with a built-in randomizer. The results is one of the largest experiments ever conducted in the history of science. Last year, the total number of participants was 18,500. The statistical significance of the very positive results from Amsterdam has been calculated by a statistician here in Amsterdam as 10 to the minus 360. Well, this is sort of like more than the number of atoms in the universe. This is totally mind-blowingly significant. The experiment is still going on, and fortunately 2 people from the new Metropolis Centre are here this evening who have been running and who initiated this experiment. And it is one of the, as I say, one of the largest experiments ever conducted right here in this city. In other words, in short, there's a massive amount of evidence for the reality of this phenomenon. There's no evidence against it. It fits with many people's ordinary experience. It's a phenomenon very well known to security guards, surveillance officers, private detectives. I've interviewed large numbers of people whose job it is to watch others. And most of them are very familiar with this. If you go on a training course to be a private detective, for example, perhaps most of you haven't, but if you do, very early on you learn that if you're following somebody, of course you don't want them to see you. You don't stare at them, because if you stare at their back, they're going to turn around, see you, and your cover's blown. Of course you have to look at them a little bit, otherwise you lose them. So these things are very well known in the military and the martial arts. You can train your sensitivity to people's intention and where they're looking at you from. These are extremely well known, especially among those who are professionals or who are trained in these areas. There are also things that happen with animals. Many people have found they can tell when animals are looking at them or when they're looking at animals. Many people find they can wake their dogs or cats by staring at them, for example. And I think these things are probably very common in the animal kingdom. I'm suggesting that animals also project out their perceptual world just like we do. There's nothing specifically human about this. It's the way vision works, I suggest. And I think that in the animal kingdom, this may go back a very long way indeed, possibly even to the first stages of the evolution of the eye, which was about 530 million years ago. In predator-prey relationships, if any prey animal could detect when a predator was looking at it and get out of the way, it would obviously increase its chance of survival. And I think that's really what lies behind a phenomenon that's normally treated as if it's completely at the margins of human experience, and yet everybody knows about it. Until 10 years ago, there'd only been 3 published papers on this subject in the entire psychological literature for a century. It's been a totally taboo subject. precisely because it raises such enormous implications about the way our minds work and the way vision.
So as you can see, there's a couple of fuck-ups, but overall, the patterning is pretty smooth and is starting to develop some nice contrast. So keep going for another 10 minutes or so. I'll cut this segment, check on my computer, and maybe splice on a third segment after I do the transfer, because it's going to take at least 3, if not 4 sessions to get this wrapped completely around.
That makes sense
For this phase
I'm not saying
of the picture.
really does harm. I don't know. No one's ever done experiments on it. But I think there's a huge background, evolutionary background, that underlies this folklore. I think it's because of the folklore that it's been so strongly taboo, as well as the fact it goes against the standard theory of the mind being in the brain. Oddly enough, it also works through closed-circuit television. It's well known to security guards in department stores, shopping malls, police forces, who survey people through CCTV systems, that if you look at someone really intensely, they can sometimes pick it up and start looking around to see where the hidden cameras are. I've interviewed quite a lot of people in the security industry, which is particularly well developed in Britain. We have more closed-circuit television and spy cameras than anywhere else in the world. This seems to be a fact of life. This has also been tested in laboratory experiments using closed-circuit television. The experiments have been done in a number of countries, including Britain and the United States. In those experiments, people don't guess if they're being looked at. They have their skin resistance measured with electrodes on the fingers. It's like a lie detector test. It measures emotional arousal through small degrees of sweating that occur when adrenaline is released. So people are monitored for unconscious physiological responses. They just sit there. They can read a magazine if they like. Meanwhile, in another room, another building, someone either looks at their image on a TV monitor or they look away and think of something else. People's skin resistance changes significantly when they're being looked at on a closed-circuit television system. This has been replicated several times, in fact many times. The only non-significant results have come when skeptics have done the replication, have done the looking themselves, admitting afterwards that they were thoroughly bored and weren't looking very hard. So it's easy to understand why it didn't work under those conditions, but with everybody else it's worked in a remarkably repeatable way. So I think the next step really would be to do it live on television. The kind of experiment Graham's planning to do this evening, later on, where you have a number of subjects and only one is looked at, that can be done on television. If you have 3 or 4 people in the studio, one of them was shown on television to millions of viewers, the others were not for 5 or 10 seconds, and then at the end of the trial they all had to guess if they'd been looked at or not. Could they tell the difference between millions of people looking at them and no one looking at them? This could be done live on television. It could give instant statistics. If it worked, it would be absolutely astonishing, and this phenomenon would be proved beyond a shadow of doubt when it had been replicated a few times. It would also tell us something about television, normally considered a medium that just sends stuff out. But if there's an influence back on those who are in the public eye, people in the public eye might be a little bit more careful about being on television in the first place, because it may not always be a good effect that it produces. Anyway, here's a massive amount of data for a very simple phenomenon. Anyone here can check it out uniquely in Europe by going along to the local science museum and do it for yourself. Anyone can check it out on the web. Millions of people, well, not millions, but thousands of people already have. There's already a massively significant body of data. Much is published in peer-reviewed journals, and you can find texts of my papers on my website. The full texts are available there. This is also summarized in my most recent book called The Sense of Being Stared At and Other Aspects of the Extended Mind, recently published in Britain and America, not yet in Dutch. Well, these observations point to the mind having a field-like nature, that the mind is extended beyond the limits of the brain. There's a whole other lot of evidence that points to this too, and that's evidence for telepathy. I'm now going to talk about some of this evidence, but before that I want to say something about what I think the evolutionary origins of telepathy may be. I'm arguing that telepathy is normal, not paranormal. I think it's part of our biological nature. It's extremely common. It's only called paranormal against a background of a theory of mind that says it can't happen. Then it seems paranormal. If you define the normal as what actually happens in the real world, most people have experienced it, many animals show it, it's perfectly normal and common. I'm saying it's part of our animal nature that we share with animals. Its evolutionary origins lie way back in the animal kingdom, and I think they're to do with the organisation of social groups. Flocks of birds, for example, quite often can turn almost at the same time without bumping into each other. I'm thinking of starlings, for example. In the winter we have huge flocks of starlings in Britain, thousands of birds, and when you see them flying it's quite astonishing to see how they do this without bumping into each other, and they do it too quickly to respond just to their nearest neighbours. There are of course computer models of flocks of birds. The most famous from the 80s is Craig Reynolds' Boyd's model, which you can see on the internet. These are rather naive biologically. They work as computational devices for animation, like in The Lion King. But they're very naive, they don't correspond to what happens in reality. They depend on the Boyd looking at its nearest neighbours and doing computations about their average speed and direction. In fact, these things happen far too quickly in flocks of birds for birds to be able to react to their neighbours. They happen in milliseconds, too quickly for them to see things, process it in the brain, send impulses on the nerves to the muscles and so on. And these Boyd's models are, as I say, very naive biologically, although they're useful for animating Walt Disney films. The latest state-of-the-art models of flock movement in birds are indeed field models. John Toner at the University of Oregon, for example.
Alright, so that gets me about as far as I'm probably going to get in these 2 sessions before running out the clock. Here, let me take it off the tripod, zoom in a
I think,
little
in
bit.
fact, that there is a field of the whole flock. It's what I call the morphic field. It's an example of this kind of biological field that I think is at work in nature.
So, it's pretty even, you know, I'm pretty happy with that, and after I get the noses shadowed and lightened, and the surrounding skin tones, which will be translucent so that the magenta and gold shine through, but you can see in this area where it's still a little bit knotted, it still sort of smooths around, and that's acceptable, so right on. Anyway, that's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting distressed hue. Thanks for watching, and have a good rest of your day.